It's properly humbling, inspirational, and utterly meaningful in its presence to think about. And I am the living testimony of Mademoiselle Boulanger's drive to perfection in the humble service to the muse through hard work, through character, through uncompromising pursuit of self-bettering towards the service of the uplifting art, which demands so much technical prowess, not by itself for itself, but as a tool to reach that dimension that is given to humanity by those who heard what others didn't, by those who saw what others didn't, by those who thought what others didn't. And through a more or less codified, summarized notation, we receive it as a message from a distant past in our present. It's not even a past that we're exploring. It's ourselves through the permanence of the message of the art form, which calls for ability, for, in the case of a musician, a hearing that is both an intuition forward and a monitor inward, a capacity to connect the neurons and the synapses of the brain in real time between what the eye sees from the score, from what the ear hears that the eye read that you produce through your finger on the piano. And perhaps ultimately the seeing is not essential because you're guided by this inner radar as a musician that is the hearing. Not the hearing of what is also, but the hearing of what you hear within yourself, like a distant reminiscence of something that you cannot put your fingers on palpably so, but that through technique you dig like an archaeologist from your own soul. And you shape it into an art form to be performed or to be heard or to be watched or to be analyzed or to be thought of or just to be observed or just to exist besides yourself as a work of art is there in a way besides the art author. It's given to all humans during their earth path to at some point have a connection to a dimension of uplifting, of beyond the necessary human approach of life that is sensorial, that is nervous system based, that is hormonal, that is intuitive, animalistic if you want, in the sense of soulful, because that's anima. And therefore all the education, all the learning, all the curiosity which we display or we deploy to learn, understand the ethics and the aesthetics of ancient civilizations, languages, by absolute respect for the alterity, for this tolerance towards what we don't understand, or that we think that because we become specialists in a niche knowledge with years of devoting to a given subject, like deciphering tablet from ancient times, or understanding the or trying to penetrate the hint through the notation, or filtered through the notation of the intent of the composer whom we're serving in our time, beyond the time wherein it was conceived. It's in the eye of the beholder when you watch a painting, or you see a film, or you analyze a book, or you find the ethical and moral lessons that you draw from understanding how people thought of the world, of the meaning of life, love, death, hope, desperation, and self-improvement, or abuse of others by manipulative ways. And this is the historians looking at the past as it was, beyond as we would like it to have been from our perspective of our ethics or our morals applied by our culture in our time. And to zoom it on music from this general point of view is, how do I apply the ethics of performing a musical intent from centuries ago for an instrument we don't play unless we do, which some do. But when we play a modern piano, then it's a translation in the instrumental length of sound, vibration, harmonics, capacity of hearing, precision in textures of polyphony, or complexity, or simplicity, or simply a way to bring back alive the notated elements on a piece of paper centuries ago that come alive. And then we have an opinion about how this translation, literally interpretation, reaches transcription, paraphrase, ornamentation, decoration, recomposition, editing, or just recitation. And to the utmost detail of the placement of a dynamic range, and accent and articulation, a spacing between the tones and the pitches and the pulses and the rhythms, and who determines the right tempo before the metronome in 1815 by Melzel established the amount of beats a minute is something objective that can be determined. And even so, the subjectivity of the length of sound, of the length of the phrase, of the suggested lyrics in a let's say lyrics music, instrumental, or dance music that is stylized but not to be dance but evocative of the dance, or the piano as an instrument evocative of the orchestral, operatic, or sacred music dimension of the music that can be perhaps translated through its essence rather than through its orchestral, colorful, plethoric, colorful presentation. It's almost like comparing a black and white silent movie to a 3D color movie. But in both cases, the essence is more important than the technique through which you demonstrate it, because it touches ultimately our soul. Reading a book, traveling in imagination, we don't need a filmmaker, we don't need a reader, because we were taught to read the mother tongue that we spoke by ear, just like music. And then after we responded to our mother speak by imitating them, then we went to school to learn grammar, syntax, and how to think, therefore how to read, therefore how to discover. But at the essence is the hearing. And the hearing intends fantasy, imagination, daydreaming, intends precision, intends fetching the exact vibration of an interval in the way you tune an instrument or the way you expect an orchestra to resonate. And then you have the aesthetics of the conductors who then implement a certain pitch to obtain certain brilliance of the sound through the tension of the strings of the instruments like the violins. One could go very far in so many analogies of the translation of the intent through the instrumental, but also through the philosophical, the ethical, the understanding of what is longing through a syncopation, a harmonization that is delayed by its resolution through appoggiaturas or possibly suspensions, which create by themselves a language within, while it's a technique, they express a meaning. And when you perform a music piece, you are a meaningful reteller of something which you don't own for its creation because somebody else heard it before you played it. And of course, many other play, and today more than in the centuries before, it's recorded. So you have access to it, which in my youth we didn't even have access to the recordings as easily as today. So the young generation of students trusts a teacher but also compares with many other performers of the same piece they're studying, under the guidance of a trusted teacher, hopefully so. And nobody's infallible, and nobody should pretend to know how it was supposed to be played because nobody was alive to record it then. We do educated knowledge, guess about the performance practice through treatises and reconstitution of old instruments if we don't have them still. And what happens ultimately? Our hearing changes, the pitches go higher, the style of tuning, the expectation of affect, the affects and the effect of the affects. The piano by itself, it's called soft, forte, loud. Cristofari inventing a harpsichord that expresses through dynamic contrasts its emotion. Harpsichord for 3 centuries before or so expressed musical expression, therefore human expression through music. Would it be dancing or singing, canta baila in Spanish, or aria for the air, literally, of the voice, imitated on the harpsichord, first as an accompaniment, then as an instrument that replaces the voice with the harmonization and the polyphony of the possibility of several voices together, but with a shorter decay than what later the fortepiano and today the piano would do. But then does the length of sound and the capacity of dynamic contrasts overwhelm the expression of the harpsichord that was based on articulation, delaying important notes, creating a sense of rhetoric, which is lost with the dynamics that are sort of nuclear because they sort of cover everything else in the dust, because it's so more powerful when you shout or you whisper to strike the attention of the listener than the subtlety of a delaying leading tone or a usage of a mode in minor descending or ascending that has a sharp 6 towards the leading tone 7 that is flat 7 on the way down, and then in the minor third of the bottom tetrachord. And so you have several minor modes, one major mode with 2 symmetrical tetrachords that make it more simple, but then you get into the 6th degree, that the relative minor key that shares the key signature, and you realize that it's almost like a myriad of planets that have a certain order from the harmonics or the overtones with the frequencies of the vibration of the resonance of a sound pitch, not a noise. And then how musicians harnessed these vibrations in major and minor, when the first non-perfect interval, that's octave or fifth, comes 2 octaves and a half after in the order of the overtones, that is the major third, which explains not only, but in part, the aesthetic choice of Baroque organ and resonant acoustics of churches with lots of echo to finish minor key music in major chord we call Picardy in America, though it's nothing to do with the country, or rather the area of northern France, but that's called to finish in major a Picardy third. It could be also to have that clean resonance without the minor third brushing over the overtone of the major third. And who's to say that these were only logical choices the composers did when sometimes they don't finish a minor piece in major, and Bach is customary to both cases, in fact, according to his fancy or wish or conviction. And perhaps there is an intuition within that is like the choice of a tonality for a chromatic instrument, meaning not like a French horn in F or an English horn in F or a clarinet in B flat, that are constructed in a way to play through a certain organization of tonalities, and strings play more naturally in sharp keys and winds in flat keys in terms of the key signature, naturally. Piano is a chromatic since the tuning of Silbermann, Bach's buddy, so to say, who is credited for having put on the map the well-tempered tuning, which allows us chromatically to play in every key on the same keyboard, which for the perfect thirds, which were pure thirds, the major thirds, which overwhelmed the octave, that is no more the unison, but then you only can play in one key in which you tune, and then the others are out of tune, or you can use them in expression also, as composers did, le ton de chèvre, the goat tone, as it used to be called, for the dissonances, which are expression of emotion, of soulful sorrow or mourning, when you write a piece in memory of dead, in the Baroque times, king or colleague, the tombeaux, the graves, or the in memoriams, or the homage, à Rameau, à tombeau de Couperin, as Ravel and Debussy retook the tradition in the neo-Baroque or neoclassical 20th century, revisiting the illustrious ancestors through this looking back while being modern. And if I speak to you about the humbling inspiration of Mademoiselle Boulanger's high admiration for character, it wasn't over talent, it was with talent. For her, talent was a given by God, and she didn't proselytize or insist to make it so when she described it. She just told it, perhaps for the fact that that's how her vocabulary functioned. But what she did pedagogically is not only detect it, which is the first step, but then forge in these who have that talent the character to incessantly work hard on improving it through hard work of technique that you acquire. Between the innate and the acquired, she privileged the acquired, respecting the innate, and coating the whole in humility, to share it with others and not to use it for your proper interest or a self-serving, easy-come narcissism, especially when it manifests the talent or the gift, as they say, in a child. Then it's a child prodigy. Then immediately there is a fascination of this monstrous level of the situation. Why does a child who has no experience of life produce music, in the case of a Mozart, of a Saint-Saëns, of a Mendelssohn, of some of these composers who seemingly had an old soul in their birth and already were able through a music language beyond the amount of knowledge that they haven't yet acquired, like Schubert intuitively. And of course, people like Bach with great knowledge of mathematics and arithmetics and organization of structures. It's not incompatible, the construction with the intuition, the emotion with the drive, and the humility to have received a capacity to vibrate as a membrane to a portion of humanity through its conception. And some of us develop or are detected to have um, an antenna of sort, as I like to call it, a radar, or at least sensitivity and ability to translate the meaningful beauty of words which are used every day and become a poem through a meaning and a sound of the music of the words, or music as words of a poetry which in fact talks about humanity and our experience as such on earth, longing for longevity, possibly immortality, condemned to mortality, and transmitting rather than destroying by sharing this gift, either through a work of art, either through our own sharing of the technique towards it, which we do as teaching, or we do as composing when others play, or we do in doing ourselves the playing or the meaning or the restriking of what is meaningful in a score. How do you read a page? How do you determine what is the essence, harmonic, melodic, whatever it's the language of its aesthetics, atonal, posttonal, or modal, and which and how? So yes, that is the work of an archaeologist, or to a certain extent of a scientist in music, a musicologist, a music scholar, somebody who experiences and therefore writes and doesn't play a Waldstein Beethoven sonata, but writes a book about how it's made. And the two are not incompatible, between the doers and the thinkers, the makers and the dreamers. The inspiration comes not because you would try to, and Mademoiselle was very careful about it, to explain the mystery of the beauty of the creation, therefore of the musical creation in the case of a musical piece, but approach it humbly, but very systematically, analyzing it with the curiosity of the loving soul, with the curiosity of the enthused person for whom it's meaningful to do so, because it's, I guess, not only innate but acquired appetite towards developing such knowledge. You could also be satisfied just to play it without to think about it, and that's absolutely wonderful too. And some people are triggered to try to explain it. Do they reach the point where they explain what is not explainable, but more likely describe processes that they, or we can, by analytical approach of a score, determine that led to the piece's existence in the form in which it was presented and left for us to discover centuries after. So in part is a historic approach, in part is an ethic approach, and in part it's an aesthetic approach. The ethic is to be relentlessly working hard on something that is music by essence, unless recorded, and not always, is vanishing, is ephemeral. As soon as constructed, the work which existed in the imagination at some dimension of our cerebral awareness, our emotional connection to our cerebral awareness, this sonata that was played was displayed in thin air, literally through the vibrations of the sounds, that vehicled through the intervals, the leaps, the pulse, the rhythm, the combinations of consonances and dissonances and whatever they meant in the time when they were written compared to what they mean today. So how do we extract ourselves from our approach of, and also our technology that allows us to think and work longer and faster because we have electric light at night and we have capacity to connect distant people so quickly with technology that allows us to exchange in real time more. But ultimately, do we reach more to the essence of the core in humility of how we serve our art? Well, I think the technique is what you give a student. That's what I do. By conviction, for having received so generously the knowledge of the seven clefs. Okay, today it's a not necessary knowledge because people can print and computer publish in any key, any piece. So you don't need to transpose to read in the key, in the clefs. Okay, but that is one tool. Another tool is to develop the hearing so that you can discern, decipher through the hearing what you really hear in the performance. Therefore, what you really hear in your performance, you can record yourself and then listen to it and still not detect it. Hearing, listening, analytical understanding. In other words, not try to explain why it moves you, why it's beautiful, because it's, as Mademoiselle would say, music expresses things that we adopt as moment of affection, moment of tenderness, or some other human aspect that we connect cognitively to, or emotionally to, or in all aspects of our sensorial approach to it. If it's music inspired by a philosopher, music imitating the nature from water, wind, or something, art by essence is artificial life, and therefore it is recreation of life's essence, and there is a soul in every element of life, and therefore we have to be respectful, and therefore we have to be tolerant. And not because we become knowledgeable, become intolerant. Not because we have a character that we should be manipulative of others. Not starting to develop walls against new ways of looking at it. As a new student comes, they have a fresh eye on something that I might have missed in all my years of experience. And if I am not humble enough to accept it, as Mademoiselle used to say when I was in the third tier of my daily lessons, sight reading music that she prepared for me to discover in her presence. She was rediscovering what I was discovering, and I was commenting it as an explorer, discovering a universe, a world, a planet, a texture, an emotion that is embedded in those few signs on paper that in fact means so much and so many things to so many people and so differently to so many people, for it not to be only locked into one way, my way, not your way being the right way, but to be humbly open, to trace through the discoveries of different styles of time periods, of centuries of musical compositions, a diagonal connection of line that only can be fruitful if you have general culture about the time period, of the paintings, of the literature, of the politics of the time, that is history to us, but which was the reality of their time, and how these humans who lived, who created things that are intemporal, that are universal, that mean to us today something even through a different instrument, acoustic way of translating it, transmitting it, and hearing it, perhaps even understanding it or misunderstanding it, or perhaps not purposely, but by the essence of the fact. Because in the past, most people dealt only with the music, let's say, of their own time, very little of the one of their past, because they had little access to it compared to us, compared to our pasts, in plural, many pasts. So we could be overwhelmed for the todays if we are so much involved in the yesterday in music. And I think that this should not be a contradiction, it should be a completion. We are in the present, which is the immediate future and the already past. So therefore, we are in a perpetual present until, as I like to say by analogy for Bach's music, when I suggest to students not to finish by obligation, is sometimes it's possible, but not necessarily an obligation to ritenuto and slow down at the end of a Bach piece. We didn't add a coda most of the time, if not 99% of the time. I like to say Bach doesn't end, it just stops. It's almost like his name in Bach German means source, as if it's in analogy a flow that never ends, and we just stop, but it doesn't end in the sense of a conclusive end with the ritenuto. And therefore, I would say by analogy that Mademoiselle Boulanger taught me the humility to explore what I love, not because I thought by understanding it I will love it more or I will own it. And that was why the humility is so important to be taught as well as the knowledge, is because I was taught both by her and I transmit them both. Because I believe that if not, it becomes arrogance. And if humility is weakness of character, then arrogance is not strength of character. The real strength of character, as Mademoiselle would say, is the relentless pursuit of your self-bettering in service of the muse. Therefore, with the students, the chamber musicians, the orchestra if you conduct, or yourself when the piano when you play by yourself. In other words, you're in a perpetual work, more than only an enjoyment, which in part it is the case because you work with elements in which you feel like you belong emotionally or sensorially, you know. An astronomer in the space void and the musician in the intervals or the sounds and the vibrations and how they combine and how they don't combine or how much they should combine. And so on the piano you have the pedal, which singers don't have when they sing, only have their breath, or the wind players. You don't have a bow to make the legato, but you imitate it through overlapping or holding within the keys before you uplift them fully, because if not, the hammer system is by essence percussive, even if with a resonance. But because of the dampers, you can have clarity, unlike on the harp, which resonates until you damp it with your hands. Here we have dampers. So the action between the pianist and the instrument, through the action, you in fact touch the essence of what you understood of the piece, and you can change mind through life with this beautiful passing of life to discover passage of life, to discover what it means or what it meant and what it means still, or you discover that the music remains young when you get older because it remains always what it was when you saw it the first time. And when you see it in the eyes or the student's capacity, you feel like not only transmitting your experience, which would be too one-sided, and in a way, yes, it is asymmetrical, but that is not what gives you the authority. The authority is to be humble, both student and teacher, in front of the artwork. And that, for a teacher or somebody with experience, humility is an effort. Because before even to reach the level of arrogance, self-sufficiency in the desire to put walls around our knowledge in order to protect ourselves, draped in a specialist connoisseur of this or that. Nobody is a connoisseur fully of anything. And nobody is only jack of all trades and master of none, because we are master of none anyway. But we're curious of everything within, let's say, the arborescence of our interest in a given field, that can go from playing a Beethoven sonata slow movement to read a philosophical text of that makes you understand or if not understand, makes you reflect in what you're going to play through the notes that you play to make them meaningful. And it might be not the only, there might be so many different ways to associate the music to our approach through our culture, our general knowledge, our curiosity. And therefore, when Mademoiselle Boulanger was facing very talented, strongly talented, gifted, skillful, let's say, pianists, she would not harness them and say, no, you should not, you should become a music theorist, keyboard harmonist, contrapuntist, and analyst before you let your fingers go wild with your intuition, because you have it intuitively in your ears since you're a child. So you can just deploy them and play those fingers all over the place, because in fact you are one with the work, but you don't have to know what it is. Like Pavarotti didn't always know in which key he was singing, and nobody asked him to analyze the art of the fugue, which is a complexity that Bach cherished through a certain, of course, polyphony that comes from a Western music development from Middle Ages to Renaissance to Baroque in a certain part of the world, when other music experiences from are mostly mono-sounding, not polyphonic in other regions of the world, and that is the expression of their culture. And so, yes, she would only fight if you use your talent, if you have any, as a facility for self-serving. And who determines if a rubato is self-serving versus the score? Somebody objectively has to decide if a rubato is tasteful, and to which extent is distasteful. Beethoven doesn't mark, or any composer doesn't mark, the percentage of a crescendo, even if it doesn't reach, let's say, a climax, but if it has a drop from an anticlimactic subito piano, for instance. Do you go to mezzo forte to drop to subito piano, or to mezzo piano to go to... If you don't have lyrics that could hint on that for the aria, or the breathing point where you have to do in order to sing it, in the instrumental performance, these elements have to be introduced intellectually, because they don't represent a necessity to produce the sound. On the piano, you don't search for the pitch, you don't do vibrato. Well, a little with the effect of the pedal, but not really. You proceed to the expression of the musical statement through all the analogies that you have been nourished by, from philosophy to visual art to sculptor, like sculpting the sound, all the analogies of the knowledge of the time period with our time period, a war sonata, a whatever we call, or even the music is only what itself is, like a form, like the sonata, or fugue, an organization of voice independent layerings. And that, yes, they do produce a combination which then gives us a feeling of, like when you look at a sunset or sunrise, yes, it is celestial mechanics, but we put in our personal emotion into it by sadness or hope, if it's one or the other, because we associate and we cannot dissociate. We shouldn't. And Mademoiselle didn't ask us to dissociate our cerebral analytical understanding of a given composer's language in a given composer's work that we're trying to understand, in order perhaps to play, conduct, perform, or write about, or teach, or all combined. It was the humility to, and that's what she privileged, and that's what she praised, was the hard work. Did you do your personal best when you did this research, this performance, this composition, this exercise of harmony, this exercise in, did you put, as she would quote Shakespeare, words without thought, never to heaven go. It was another way to tell us, put meaning and put consciousness in the daily routines. It's easy to say, difficult to do. People surrender to autoplay mechanics, muscular memory for pianists, and to a certain extent you need it. But you develop it because you work on it. It's not innate. And if you only use the innate talent that you have, that shortcuts the knowledge that you don't have or you haven't had yet a chance to have when you were, let's say, a child prodigy, she privileged the constructive hard work that you do to reach each even tiny level of daily routine, short, mid, long-term practicing progress on your capacity of concentration, of capacity of attention, through a keyboard harmony exercise of, let's say, she loved to make us do on the piano, pianists or not, because her students were not all pianists, but to play keyboard harmony was to play meaningfully voice leadings through sequences of 4 parts, playing in different tonalities and then thinking the functions and the piece in real time, like the GPS displayed not only by ear and finger memory like many pianists. Shortcut to success, which is good, but then at some point the glass ceiling says you cannot go further, exploring repertoires, understanding meanings, deciphering things by yourself, despite what you can be told or you try to imitate from the people who develop this incredible knowledge that today we have access to through performances and treatises and books and musicologists and scholars and virtuosos. Hard work. That was what she praised over talent. Perhaps I would be wrong to say over. I would say she desperately pushed us through humility to work to better ourselves in order to share it with others for what we received. At least that's what she asked me, and that's what I applied my life for the last 5 decades since to do through teaching. Also, when I have an opportunity to perform, through directly playing or sharing with chamber musicians the essence of music, the upbeat, the downbeat, the breath, the things that are not notated that mean the narration that you have to share and decide and agree to disagree and organize. It's just the meaning of serving the muse, literally. And Mademoiselle was a great mentor in the sense of combining the strive for elite, not elitism, through talent and not for itself, but to serve the music community and humanity in general through your own creation for others or through your own transmission of knowledge, understanding, and to a certain extent understanding of what you do and how you do it. And all teachers do that with an awareness of it. I'm very humbled and very lucky to have been given the chance so far to live up, hopefully, to her standards of expectation, which of course I will never reach, but I will continue as long as I have intellectual and physical strengths to serve for the students to come.